Welcome back to Vancouver Carpenter. In this video, I'm going to go through all the steps to get that really nice exposed beam look. So I'm just at the boarding stage right now, and that is the first place where you need to start making decisions. So the first thing you need to know is what kind of corner bead or tape are you going to use to get it up nice and tight to that beam. So in my case, I'm going to be using tearaway bead. This is a specialty vinyl corner bead that we use all the time to get a nice clean finish without getting mud onto a nice finished product like this beam. So I wouldn't recommend methods like flat taping or caulking and doing all this kind of stuff because inevitably you're going to make a mess on the nice wood. So let's go around to the other side of this and I'll show you guys how I got this. Right now this is just the unfinished bevel of the board. I have exactly a 1/8 gap here, which is perfect for getting the tearaway bead in. You want to have about a 1/8 to a 1/4 inch gap, and I'll show you what I did to get that. So normally when you hang your first sheets on a ceiling, you're going to push them up tight against something on your first row. So of course, because I needed the gap, I couldn't push it up tight against here. So what I did was I took this shim material, it's about 1/8 of an inch, and I just taped it up here in the joist bay, because that way the tape and all that stuff wouldn't leave any residue on this beam. And these shims were there, so I was able to slide the board up against these. On this part, because it's an enclosed space that I can measure really easily, all I have to do is give myself a 1/4 inch. So if I have 21 3/4, I'm gonna measure this at 21 1/2, and I'm gonna push it tight to this side to make sure that I have a gap along this side. Okay, here's where we're gonna see the drywall hammer in action. Oh, that was some action, all right. Taper's gonna fix that. Okay, well that didn't wind up too pretty. Nothing a little pre-fill won't take care of. But this, on the other hand, wound up perfect for getting that tearaway bead in. So we have maybe a big 1/4 inch, which is a little more than I might have ideally wanted, but it'll do. Okay, so next is the tearaway bead install, but as you can see, I have a lot of boarding to take care of first, so we'll have to cut to when I'm finished and start taping. Okay, before I can install the tearaway bead, there's something I have to address that I should have addressed before. I don't know if this kind of thing ever happens to you guys, but I got really carried away with boarding this place, and I forgot to check to see how flat all of the joists were, to see how well the joist hangers were installed, and they are waving all over the place, and I already have the board installed and taped. So get a load of this. When I put this level on here, we have like a 1/2 inch. It nosedives up. Well, it's not a nosedive because it's going up, but there's a 1/2 inch gap right here. And we are gonna have to float that out or this tearaway strip is gonna look really bad. And part of the problem is because I've already got this gap here that the tearaway is supposed to slip up into, once I float this out, that's all gonna get full of mud. So what do? Well, there is actually a solution. So I'm glad that this happened because I can show you guys the other type of tearaway bead. So this is what's known as a tearaway flat. It doesn't have the bottom flange that's meant to cover the bare edge of the drywall because it's meant exactly for this purpose, which is just butting up against the drywall. So hopefully you haven't left that little gap, because if you can get a tearaway flat, you don't need the gap. You can butt your drywall right up against whatever it is you're working on. So yeah, tearaway flats. And just for reference, here's your regular tearaway. You see it has that big flange there that has to slip into somewhere. Okay, so this sort of thing is actually easier to fix than most people would think. You just get a bunch of mud. I mean, you're gonna have to build it way back. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. So what we're doing right now is just getting a bunch on here to float out. And once you get the general depth that you're looking for, so I'm mostly trying to get it really thick in that corner, a little more, right about there. The key is to make sure that you have a lot extra on. This is just hot mud, quick set, 45. And now we take the Derby and we're just gonna pull this back a little and just kind of flatten all that stuff out. Until it's looking pretty good. Got too much, not enough back here, too much there. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. You really only need one part of it to actually be deep enough. That looks pretty good. That's right about what we needed. So as you can see, it's not perfect. Where it was thin, it's pretty easy to get it fairly smooth. And as you get back into the corner, I mean, look at that, right? But once that sets up, you skim it out again and that'll flatten out all those hollows and voids. So I did there, and those two spots. And on this side we have 1, 2, big wide one, and another deep but not too long one in the corner there. Okay, I'm now just gonna give this all a uniform skim, really thin. You know, it's not gonna add much more than a mil because we already have like the actual heights established. So it's just filling in all the inconsistencies so that we can actually put a bead onto it. Let this be a lesson to you. A few shims would have saved me a lot of work here. This also should tell you how much I hate pulling board down. If I'm willing to go to this length versus pull the board down. So as you can see, when you bring it down a ½ inch, you have to go really far back. I'm almost 3 feet back there, and I haven't even started coating the bead, so it'll probably go another foot back to really float that out and make it unnoticeable. But yeah, it's looking pretty flat. By the time I get the tearaway bead on there, a couple of coats, should be pretty straight. Okay, it's finally time to install this stuff. So there is the easy way, and then there's the way that I'm going to do it. So the easy way would have been to have run the drywall tight to the beam and then done spray adhesive and used the flat tearaway. That would be by far the easiest and fastest way to install this stuff, but I'm not going to do it for 2 reasons. One, because I've already mudded up here, I don't have like necessarily 100% flat surface, and I don't think the spray adhesive is gonna grab as well to the mud. And 2, I'm tired of smelling that stuff. It's pretty nasty. And so I'm going to install this with mud, but it is gonna take a little bit longer, but I do believe it will be adequate when done. So you should be using like a heavyweight all-purpose or a taping mud if you guys have that. Something with a lot of glue. And you might be thinking, you can't tape on plastic, but I've been doing it for a long time, so don't be surprised. It works. And the only reason for this really quick thin layer of mud is just to get the plastic to stick. So you don't need a lot of mud like you would if it was paper tape. It's literally just to get the plastic to kind of tack up here. Okay, so next we just stick this up here like so. Push it tight against the beam. And next you want to just make sure it's actually stuck on there, and then you wipe out this part. So you'll notice that there's a little lip here. I'm not going to that edge yet. If I was going to that edge, it would look more like this. It would be covered, but we're not doing that yet. We're just wiping that part. Push it tight against the beam. You can keep it tidy, clean that stuff off whenever possible. And if you need to get it a bit more snug, you can always push it in. And at that point, you could throw a staple. Next, I like to put mesh tape across this flange, but make sure you don't put it onto the nosing of the bead. And it doesn't hurt to run your knife along it really quickly, just to kind of press it down. And now we are actually going to coat the whole thing up to the nosing of the bead. Trying to keep it tidy. And I like to go in one direction to put it on. We'll feather that edge. And then one direction to clean it off. The reason I do that is that it pushes the mud into both sides of the air pocket so you don't wind up with empty pockets and not as good a bond. I even went to the lengths of folding this tape over here just to give it a bit more strength, so that's actually joining a little bit like a corner tape. So this does beg the question, do you think the mesh tape is actually necessary? And what I think about the mesh tape is, like, if it's on the bead, I think if the bead's gonna try and lift, that it has the tape kind of stopping it from lifting as easily. So that crack is gonna have way harder time showing up. So that's my theory behind it. You'll notice that on the arch behind me, I've put mesh tape. I don't do a lot of vinyl bead, so maybe it's just me not trusting it that much. You don't necessarily have to put this stuff on everything, all the vinyl like I have, but I just do it for insurance. So here it is, all bedded in. As you can see, the mesh tape is looking pretty buried. And we can start to get an idea of what this is going to look like now. It's going to take 2 more coats to cover this. Okay, you guys, so I'm on the last coat here. So normally what you would do is you would just use, you know, progressively bigger knives to coat the corner bead, you know, maybe out to about here, like up to a 10-inch knife or so, and you would get a really nicely well blended in bead. But in this case, because I had to build it out so much, and because I also have joints just right over here, I have to coat it this way instead of this way. So it's not a big deal. And this is like almost the last thing I have to do on the entire job. I just got a blob on my head. But yeah, we're so close to done this whole thing here, which I'm pretty excited about. Let's see, okay. Okay, so feather my edge. And then I'm just going across until I can see that I've gotten the porosity out. And I'm actually still leaving it on kind of thick so that it keeps the proper shape. Well, we got a couple of lines. How are we going to deal with those? Well, let's see if we can get rid of this one first. Okay, that's a nice lift off. And with these ones, instead of getting all fussed and getting my trowel in there, I'm just going to take my 6. Sometimes it's easier just to do that. And then my final pass is going to be this way to really wipe off the bead tight. And as I did that pass, I really put all the pressure on this corner of my knife. It wasn't flat, or it wouldn't have feathered properly. I would have dug in. But there we go. So that should be pretty nice and flat, and I've cleaned off the edge of that bead. So I'll get you guys up real close so you can see what I'm talking about. So as we can see, the plastic bead is shining through right there, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to bury that. We want it to be really flat up to it and fully coated. So this has had 3 coats, tape and 2 coats over top of it, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm gonna coat the rest of this off camera, but tomorrow I will film the process of pulling the strip off and show you guys the finished product. You guys, I'm pretty excited about this because this is the last little strip and then it's done. And then I've actually finished all of the new drywall on this whole job. So let's get right to it. The first thing that you're gonna need to do is just sand right up close to the edge, but you wanna try not to over sand it. Otherwise you will leave the little bead hollow. That should be adequate. Sometimes you might even want to scrape a little bit of crud off the edge if there is any. How you pull this off is really important because you don't want to pull down, or you might actually pull the bead off if you set it in with mud the way I showed in this video. So the first thing you want to do is just kind of bend this little tab a bit to get that bond of the edge a little weaker, and then grab it, and like I said, pull straight away this way. This is why it's tearaway. That's the tearaway strip. And then we gotta get this stuff out, hopefully. Yeah, good. I'm pulling down again, and the reason is so that the tape doesn't tear and get stuck underneath. Some of the spots where I built it up a lot, it did because the tape got buried by the mud. But there we go. There it is. There's a few little crumblies here because we installed it with mud. Being very careful not to scratch the beam. But that's pretty much it. And it's time for us to take a look at it. So it's kind of hard to tell because we got these lights hanging down in the way, but that is night and day straighter than it was before. I'm really glad I built it out. I've got a little gap there because the beam had a bit of a twist in it. It happens. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It's looking good from the other side too. Yeah, flattening it out, straightening those humps was a really good idea. Well, you guys, that's it. It's done. It's a pretty clean look. There's nothing that's gonna crack and separate away from the beam, like say if you flat taped or just filled it. So it's a long-term, durable, and very good looking option. Anyways, I just wanna say thanks for watching Vancouver Carpenter. As always, I hope your projects are going well, but I hope you're doing even better. Until the next one, you guys. This was a long one for me, but it's done.